they should trade Zion. And I got a proposition for the Pelicans in the league. How about we trade Zion straight up for Damian Lillard? I think both teams get better. Hear me out on this. Player that's been making the headlines, players who's been making the headlines recently is Zion. Now, I'm not gonna get into my spiel about how I think Zion is one of the most overrated prospects coming out of college that I've seen in a long
I
time.
think you should. I think you
But
should shit talk as much as you can. Why not? You're entitled to your opinion. This is a safe space. Let's talk about it.
well, I was one of the people from when they were straight coming out of college that said Ja Morant was going to be better than
Yeah.
Zion. Now, granted, Zion's had some
hmm
injuries,
Some.
but I feel like so far to this point, I've been proven right.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
so what's recently been in the headlines is that Zion, who's been out since the turn of the new year, has been out with a hamstring injury.
hmm
And recently in his interview, he said that physically he feels fine. He's just waiting till he feels more like Zion, feels more like himself
hmm
before he comes back to the court. Now, I'm not everyone is entitled to their own situations. We know mental health is a big issue,
hmm
especially in professional athletes. We see them as these larger than life
Yeah.
figures, but they're people just like us.
hmm
So I don't want to step too much into what he might be going on personally, but I'm just going to judge it based on what he said.
hmm
He's not said that he's going through any mental health problems. He just said that he wants to feel more like Zion when he plays.
hmm
I guess he's Ben Simmons now. But anyways, I I feel like Zion for the Pelicans is more trouble than he's worth. So I'm gonna get into your opinion. Do you think that they should trade Zion or what? But I'm gonna give you my first off the cusp theory.
Okay.
I think no. Actually, I'm gonna let you go first.
Okay.
What do you think that the Pelicans? Keep in mind the Pelicans before Zion's injury were a game out of first place in the West. They were the second seed in the Western Conference when Zion was healthy. Second best team in the West.
Yeah.
He gets hurt a little after January, and now they're not even making the
Yeah.
playoffs. How do you feel about Zion's situation, and what do you think the Pelicans should do going forward?
I don't doubt that healthy Zion adds a lot to the team. Like if you look at it from October to December, they had like a 60% winning average, and then into January, which is when he got hurt, like beginning of January, they went into like 18%, 20%, somewhere around there. Big gap, obviously. But they also ended their season with a 60% average winning. So they had to adjust, right? I think no doubt. He adds points. He adds also just like a little bit of flavor to the Pelicans. But um if I'm looking at it from a business perspective, I'm not getting my investments worth. I am not getting much back. He played 29 games this season. 29.
29.
Now, granted, within those 29 games, the Pelicans did have a record where they like won 17, lost 12. So majority of the time they're winning with Zion. But majority of the season they've had to play without Zion. They've had to make these adjustments without their main player, without that. And they still, granted, they didn't make it. Fair. But they were still in that playing game. So yes, he does add, he does elevate, but how often do you get him? Just because something is good temporarily doesn't mean that it's necessarily like the best thing for the team. I'm sure if you incorporated someone else into the mix, like let's say you brought in Siakam or something, right? He could give you a comparable amount of points, probably a little bit less, but comparable amount of rebounds. He averages roughly 8, and then roughly the same assists as well. So someone else could also add that. I personally, if I'm looking at this the franchise, I'd want to see what else is out there. Like,
You think they should trade him?
I think so. And maybe that's not,
I agree. I agree.
it doesn't look good on paper, I guess. Like on the books, you don't want to take a first round pick and just draft them like wherever. But I think just the experience that they have had, where they have had to just accommodate so many seasons. Like I think this is his fourth season. But he hasn't really played that many games each season or just in general. So what am I getting out of it? I'm still not getting a championship, you know? But let me raise you this argument. Prior to Zion,
Hmm.
the star that the Pelicans had a lot of attention around was AD. Now that ended up not being a good fit and he wanted out, right? And they got rid of him,
Yes.
yes. So could it come down to when Zion is saying he doesn't feel like Zion, it's more about the environment that he's in. It's more about the franchise rather than just him as a player.
I think that's an interesting argument. I think for me, I want to say no. I want to say that New Orleans has a good fan base. It
Yes.
definitely seems like it's a fun place to be. If you're Zion, clearly it's a good place to eat. And I just think that I think when AD left, no, we're not. I'm not that shaming Zion. I'm saying that the hamstring
Yeah.
is a soft tissue injury. And for anyone who's a little familiar with sports and injuries, a soft tissue injury is one of the easiest injuries to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Preventable.
make sure you're hydrated, make sure you stretch, make sure you do your proper warm-ups before you're full-blown. Yeah, very preventable, very preventable. So for him to be out 4 months with a soft tissue injury, no surgery, no torn ACL, no Achilles, no back, it makes me question, are you doing everything necessary off the court so that you can be on the court? Because keep in mind, after he does this interview, Zion's windmilling, putting it between his back, dunking before the game. So he's not that hurt.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's not so hurt he can't go give you 25
He's also
minutes. Like
very
if you're
young.
windmilling and all this before the game.
Mm-hmm.
So are you doing everything necessary? Diet, nutrition, exercise, stretching, working with your trainer? Are you doing everything necessary? Very young, right? 22, 23 years of age. You kind of heal like a superhero at that age. You know what I mean? And he also has the best resources money can buy available to him. So to be out 4 months with a soft tissue injury, it makes me wonder how dedicated you are actually to being on the court.
That's a good argument.
I feel like with AD's situation, his team wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough to get over the hump. And I feel like that is really why he wanted out. I feel like with Zion, if a healthy Zion, yeah, I feel like if Zion is healthy with this current roster, they would be just as good as any other team in the mix. And speaking on that, I want to throw a theory out there for you. I agree. They should trade Zion. And I got a proposition for the Pelicans in the league. How about we trade Zion straight up for Damian Lillard? Now, Damian Lillard to me, he's not one of my favorite players. I don't think he's necessarily a top 10 player. Check out my other video for where I get into that. But I think that he is an elite basketball player. I think if you trade Zion with the Pelicans or trade Zion with Dame to the Pelicans, I think both teams get better. Hear me out on this. You take Dame and you pair him back with CJ McCollum in the backcourt, and now the Pelicans were one win away from being in the playoffs this year. For all of missing Zion, for all of the struggles, they were one game out of being in the playoffs this year. You take Dame, you pair him back with CJ McCollum. Now, keep in mind, this duo in Portland did make a conference finals a few years back. They got swept by the Warriors, but they did make it to the conference finals. You pair Dame with CJ McCollum, but this time you have Brandon Ingram as your small forward, another elite all-star caliber player who can average 25, 26, 27 points per game. You still got your dominant center in Jonas Valanciunas, who is, in my opinion, better than Yusuf Nurkic on Portland. And you got a lot of young up-and-coming players like Trey Murphy. If you put Dame on the currently constructed Portland team, they're just as good as any other team in the West right now. Right now, we're talking about how the West is up for grabs. You got Denver, Memphis, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Warriors, Sacramento. To me, Dame on the Pelicans with CJ and Brandon Ingram in them, they're just as good as any of those teams. They're right there in the mix. They're right there in the mix with any of those teams. They have a possibility to win. Now, if you're looking at it from Portland's point of view, why do you give up Dame, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're, like you said earlier, you're in Cancun right now, even with Dame. You didn't even make the play-in. You didn't even have a chance of making the playoffs. So whether you like it or not, if you're Portland, you're in a full-blown rebuild. You're
That's
rebuilding. True. You're trying to build your team up. Now, if you trade Dame, who's a superstar in his 30s now, I think Dame is 30, 31. You trade him for a younger player in Zion, you put the ball in Anthony Simon's hands. You allow him to be the guard who scores, distributes. You let him run the offense, and you build him up as he's up and coming in age, up and coming as a star player. You still got Jeremy Grant on the wing. You still got Yusuf Nurkic, and now you can bring along Zion slowly till he feels more like himself and he's ready to play. Now, when Zion plays, you have a young team. You have a young core. There's no expectations on Zion to lead you to a championship. You got Anthony Simons, you got Zion, you got Jeremy Grant, you got Nasir Little, you got all these young pieces who are going to be hungry and ready to prove themselves. And I feel like they're a better team that way because you have your point guard already, Anthony Simons. You don't have to worry about being too little in the backcourt with Dame and Anthony Simons. You have Anthony Simons, and then you can surround him with long, athletic, big wing players like Jeremy Grant, Nasir Little, and obviously Zion. I think you take both of those teams, you trade them for each other. Maybe you have to trade a couple picks, a couple, off the bench guys to make the salaries match, because I know Dame has a pretty big contract. But I think in that trade, both teams are better than they currently are right now. I know Dame says he wants to be in Portland, but he's also been kind of contradicting himself in a way by saying he wants to be in a position to win. So I think instead of him requesting a trade, if Portland trades him for Zion, I think both teams are better than they are right now, and you got two more competitive teams in the Western Conference.
I kind of like that, honestly. I think what would be hard for me to accept if
I've been thinking about
if I'm the Blazers, it would be hard for me to accept would just be that you do invest in a younger player, but if a younger player has already giving you so much injury history, it's a little bit harder to invest. And I hope that's really not the case for Zion because he could potentially have a very long career, and I wouldn't want him to have that. So I do like that scenario.
Let me
Deal
hold
with
on
it.
before you keep going. I want to throw out another great player, probably going to win MVP this year. Definitely would get my vote. Joel
Yeah.
Embiid sat out the first 3-4 seasons of his
Yeah.
career. Injuries.
Hmm.
Granted, you could argue the 76ers were tanking on purpose and they got Ben Simmons. Look how great that worked out. But anyways, they were tanking to get the top draft picks. So that you could argue that, but he did sit out the first 3-4 seasons of his career, and Joel Embiid is a great
Dominant.
player to this day.
Yeah.
Great, dominant, great player. So you could argue Zion could be on a similar trajectory.
Yeah.
You pair him, you put him with a young and hungry team, you bring him along slowly. I know I feel like from Portland's perspective, it might be a little bit more of
A
like
risk.
we have Dame,
Yeah.
but like I said, even with Dame, you're in Cancun.
That's true.
You're in Cancun right now, even with Dame. So you're rebuilding. Whether you like it or not, you are
Yeah,
rebuilding. So why not do that with a younger, bigger, more athletic player and then hope in 2, 3 seasons you're competitive?
right. So, and I do like that because I mean, you have a team like OKC who also, they weren't that, it took them a couple of years to get to where they're at now. So I do see what you're saying. I do like it, honestly. Uh, I think personally for Zion, I think it's more kind of what you said, that whole pressure of leading them to a championship. That so you have to kind of factor in, or maybe you as a franchise don't have to factor in, but I think as like an audience, factor in if you want to build a young and hungry team, how hungry is Zion, for an actual win. Um, I think you kind of come in, right? And you have this big paycheck. You're still getting your paycheck even if you're not playing. You already had a lot of popularity coming into the league. Like you already had deals and stuff like that. You were kind of,
Nike shoe deal for
yeah,
Zion, 50 worth 50
ex
million. 50 million.
exactly. So you already have that. You were kind of brought in, or at least marketed as this next LeBron kind of guy. Uh, that same
So
superhuman,
offensive.
but that same superhumanness that we were talking about that like LeBron has, right? That he's explosive, no doubt about it. But again, you don't really just win championships just straight up out of just pure that capability. You also have to be hungry for it. You have to put in the efforts into the gym of, like you said, getting healthy, being able to make adjustments to prevent those injuries, and also just being able to kind of push through hard times too, because at the end of the day, everyone's in the same place as you, kind of, right? Like maybe they don't have the same level of pressure, and maybe that's what's making him crumble, and maybe that's why he doesn't really want to like show up. Um, it's a lot for 22 years old, 23. He's he's got a lot of pressure. He's got a lot of a spotlight on him, and I think maybe that probably may be playing a bit more into a role to it. So I do like the idea that if he was at the Blazers, it's still a younger team. It's not necessarily a team that has an expectation like the Warriors, that where it's like you're kind of constantly going to the playoffs. So you have a little bit more leeway to where you can kind of acclimate him a bit better. But I think ultimately it's it makes me question how in it he is for himself. Like is this actually are championships and all of that, or do you have a Dame mentality where championships don't matter? How hungry are you for this career that?
You don't know how mad it made me when Dame said
Why
that.
do you think
But
I brought
anyway,
it
I'm
up?
not gonna get into it. Oh my goodness, that was you have no idea. If I'm Portland, I don't even want my star player to have that type of
Yeah,
mentality. Like to hear your star player kind of be like, I don't know why everyone's so obsessed with rings and winning.
yeah,
It's just the such opposite of the Mamba
yeah.
mentality. I can't
Love.
even get it. Please continue your point.
Okay.
Please continue. I can't even get
I do think that like your idea of trading him in, it would, or at least even if it's not into the Blazers, just bring him into a team where you can kind of develop over the next few years. I do think that's good. He's very talented. There's no doubt about it. That's why he got so much attention coming in. That's why he had a shoe deal before most NBA players probably do, right? Um, but it's kind of a thing where it's to me now kind of presenting slightly more Ben Simmons, like you said, where it's like, I'm not ready to play. I don't, a little bit more reluctance on his end. That's what it seems like to me. I mean, obviously, you kind of touched on his weight too. He probably could benefit from just getting a bit healthier to prevent injury. But, I mean, you've seen also Shaq.
You're rich, my guy. Get a private chef.
Yes, yes, get a private chef. And that's
Cook all your
it's
meals.
discipline, right? It's discipline. Because you also have someone like Shaq who is a big man, but he was successful. He was winning championships. He wasn't sitting out these many games, I don't think, at least.
You're right.
Yeah, so I think to me it's becoming more adamant that it's more of a Zion issue. Yes, he gets hurt, but like you said, it's 4 months from beginning of January till the end of the regular season to where he didn't make a single appearance outside of the bench. And if I'm looking at it from the Pelicans perspective, you sitting on the bench may bring me some fans that want to take pictures of you, but from a fan perspective, that also gets old. I want to see you play, you know? So I would be looking to just kind of ruffle it up a little bit.
Get him out of there.
Hmm.
I agree. Okay. Well, I want to say thank you, Marcella, for coming on The Last Word. You've been great. Gave a lot of insightful opinion. I really appreciate you being on here with me.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun. Love this shit talk, love this banter, and I love what you're creating here. So just keep it up.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So, thank you guys all for listening. Once again, this has been The Last Word. I'm Alonzo, and we're out of here, man.